All right, everyone, welcome back to Value Stack Podcast. Today we have a special guest. Mark Maraia is a business coach, a relationship rainmaker, a writer and coordinator for the Bitcoin Magazine Contributors, the author of the Declaration of Monetary Independence, a sovereign-minded individual, and of course, like us all, has a lifelong commitment to learning. So, Mark, thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome to Value Stack Podcast.
Thanks, Zach. It's great to be here.
So we'll open it up just like we normally do when we have guests. Tell us about your Bitcoin story, your rabbit hole journey.
Yeah, it's actually starts before there was even Bitcoin, or about the same time as Bitcoin. In 2008, when the system broke, it was very obvious to me that something goofy was going on, and it kind of put me on notice that there was a problem. So I've been a student of the monetary system since 2008. I was a banking lawyer. I was a securities lawyer. So, I mean, I understood from the inside how some of that stuff worked, and I knew how goofy it was. And it's amazing that it took me until 2020, really, which was, of course, COVID, when a lot of us really go, okay, they just printed more money, in a week than had been printed in whatever. And so I bought a little bit in March and then bought a whole bunch more in November, and really have kind of gone down the rabbit hole, because what I knew about Bitcoin when I bought it really wasn't very much. I'd been following it, but just as a curiosity, not, hey, I always thought about investing, and I would have used the word investing, not saving.
Right. We talked about that. Yeah. Saving, not investing.
Yeah. But it's been a really amazing journey. I probably now have thousands of hours in it, and obviously working for Bitcoin Magazine, immersed in it all the time, like you would be. So, but it was really November of 2020. And the irony is, and this isn't unique to me, I know that happened to Jack Mallers, but my kids, who are millennials, actually, that was the November of 2020. I had a meeting with my daughter, and I said, hey, Jen, we've got some money, sold your grandparents' house, and here's what's going to happen to it with inflation. And then if we put it in something like Bitcoin, I think it might at least hold its value over a period of 3 years. And she bought it and told me about it after the fact while we're in the meeting. So it was really fun. And then my son came the same day. He bought some as well. So, I got a chance to sort of orange pill my kids rather than having to orange pill me.
Yeah, that's definitely not the way you normally hear it. Dad orange pilling the kids. I know it certainly wasn't the case in anybody in my family, or even my friends and coworkers' family.
Right.
We're usually the millennials are more plugged into the technology and see that. But it sounds like your kind of your professional background and sort of being at the right, having the right understanding at the right time led you to sort of connect the dots and see, oh, this is not just a fad, like a pet rock or a Beanie Baby thing. This is a new framework.
Absolutely. And of course, when I first got in, it's so hard to even understand it, right? The advantage I had, because my story and the way I told it was, it started in 2008. I'm of the opinion that you really can't understand Bitcoin fully, or money, until you at least understand the history of money before Bitcoin.
Totally.
And if you don't understand how the banking system either works or doesn't work, the financial system, how it works and how money works, fractional reserve, there's a whole bunch of stuff, rehypothecating US treasuries. There's just a ton of things. The way I say it to people is, our monetary system in our banking system is 200 times worse than anyone can imagine, even most Bitcoiners. And Bitcoin's probably, I say 200 times, it's probably 2 million times more amazing than anything the human mind can imagine. So that delta, you end up with a lot of people who go, oh, that's too good to be true. Must be a scam.
And I mean, my career before this was a financial advisor, and I thought the same thing. And I think I've always been sort of independent, sort of sovereign. I never really liked the rules, as my parents would say, my teachers would say. But so I've always I've been welcome to the idea of challenging the existing system in pretty much any aspect.
I love that. We'll get along really well, Zach, because I call it a maverick. I mean, even in the legal profession, I always felt like was an outsider. And I don't think of that as a bad thing. And it doesn't mean I felt I was better than the people in the system. It's just I never bought the narrative, whatever that narrative was. And I know you were saying that when you were in school, you learned about Keynesian economics. Well, that's a narrative. They didn't teach you any of the other narrative, which is sort of the Austrian side of things. Mm-hmm. And that tends to create skeptics like you and I, or mavericks, or people who think outside the box.
Right. It's like, what are they not telling me? Why are they today with the internet, it's not very hard to go on Google and read an article that says there are two schools of thought in economics, Keynesian and Austrian. And then I would go to my teachers and say, well, why have we not talked about the other school of thought in economics? And they're like, oh, well, that one's a bunch of baloney. And I'm like, well, we should, don't you think we should at least discuss it so that we can critically analyze rather than just
that our choice? Yeah. Don't you want to educate us so that we can decide whether or not we think it's bullshit?
And it's like that education by omission sort of makes you like, okay, wait a second.
Right.
Why are you not telling me? I have more questions now than if you had just told me, but again, that's partly, I think, comes with I like the maverick term you use, a skeptical outlook. I've always thought, question things, and I think and don't stop questioning, right? There's always another why.
Never. In fact, I would say, I love the stay humble, stack sats. I just wish more Bitcoiners would actually be humble.
Stay humble.
It's not about staying humble. It's about being humble, which means you have a constant beginner's mind. You're always in inquiry, and you're always learning new things. And it's been my experience, at least. I can learn as much from a Bitcoiner in Africa as I can from a Bitcoiner in the United States, but I just need to be exposed to some of their stories and some of their struggles. And the outsiders tend to be the innovators, right? And that's what's happening right now with Bitcoin. It's probably why we both like Bitcoin, right? There's sort of a natural outsider mindset, and it's becoming more of an insider thing, but it's still outsider.
Yeah, I agree. It's, when I was in financial planning, I wanted to tell my clients about Bitcoin, but there's, the fiduciary obligation, and also there's I don't want to lose my job by telling somebody something that they could, they don't fully understand. And so, it takes that outsider mindset and in a sort of a confidence in taking risk too. Like most investors are risk averse. Most people are risk averse just in general.
Very true.
And you have to have and myself included, in fact. That's why I don't invest in stocks anymore, because they're too risky.
Right.
And so the irony is that like most people think Bitcoin's this risk asset when, it certainly is correlating with the NASDAQ and other risk on assets today. But over the long term, if you do the work, right, the 1,000 hours that you put in, like I think it takes even more than that. And it's a never ending rabbit hole. That's why they call it that. But you do the work and you understand it for the properties it has, not the price related to the US dollar at the exact moment, and you get a very different picture. And that's really what we try to talk about on this podcast. Like we talk about price, but we don't really focus on it. There's some podcasts that are like focused on technical analysis, and it's like, this is what Bitcoin's going to do this month, and there's this trend line that's going to do that. Maybe they're great, and like maybe that stuff helps you get more Bitcoin if you time it right. But what we're focused on is teaching people a framework that the new world, I truly believe, the new financial system at the very least is going to be built on. And I really like that the article that you wrote about money as a battery, like this kind of idea of energy in digital form that can be sent across. Michael Saylor's talked about that. Do you mind just like kind of summarizing that article?
I think you're referencing the open letter to my children, which was really the first article I think I wrote for Bitcoin Magazine, which ultimately led to me doing a bunch of free work for them
Free
And
work, the
CK
best
goes,
kind.
hey, you're giving me a lot of value. Can we hire you? And I think of myself as unemployable. So it was a plum in CK's cap for talking me into it. But that article I wrote after having gone down the rabbit hole, and it was probably after the Bitcoin conference, I think, I'm not sure, which was in June of 2021. And I realized, okay, whether I did work in 1980 as a carpenter's helper or whether I did it as a well-paid coach, speaker, author, whatever, I took whatever I got paid. That's my energy, and I put it into something.
Yep.
What did I put it into? Well, in the almost my whole life, I put it into dollars. And it, frankly, of all the currencies in the world, it is the best place to put your money as far as currencies go. So I don't want to diss on the dollar, but it isn't as effective as Bitcoin, as I now have learned. But it wasn't probably even as effective as gold, and that's what forced everybody to come to someone like you and go, okay, I made this money, but now I want to make sure my purchasing power doesn't leak like it's a bucket with a 1-inch hole in the bottom. Mm-hmm. And so this letter to my children was, look, you guys can do anything you want. It's your money, it's your energy, but here's how I see it. And so I framed it that way because, as we were talking about before we got rolling, believe me, I'm not opposed to telling people what to do, but it never works.
Right.
So what I've learned through the School of Hard Knocks is share with people how I see it. If my way of seeing it makes sense, great. So if any one person on this podcast, the light bulb goes on and goes, oh, right, my labor is my life force. Where do I want to save it? Where am I best served to put it? Then that's a win, even if they don't put it all in Bitcoin, because now you're thinking about it in a different way. And as some people say, you make a bargain with your future self. Well, maybe that framing doesn't help me understand it. My framing is, okay, I earned $1 today. I want to have $1 of purchasing power in 30 years. Right. That's the battery concept.
And that was one of the aha moments that I had. You look at you work, you have finite amount of time and energy, and eventually you don't have any more. And there's no vehicle. I mean, historically, real estate has been kind of the best vehicle for that, but that's only partially because it gives you, anywhere from 10 or 5 to 1 to, if you put 5% down, 20 to 1 leverage. There's nothing. And that what you're really doing is leveraging the depreciating asset, because the debt is denominated in fiat and the asset that you've acquired is denominated in the home value. So they constantly are, spreading that gap. And that's what that's what I got into monetary policy and started economics, because I saw my parents having to work more and more to get the same thing when I was a 10, 11, 12. And as I got into college, I started feeling that personally. And I was like, why? This doesn't feel
right. How do I get off the hamster wheel?
And it's gotten, I'm turning 30 next month, and it's gotten even worse. And I literally went into financial planning. So I would say I'm a pretty savvy investor, and I definitely understand the concepts that, arbitrage and, I'm just throwing out words.
Money
I'll stop.
In the banking system.
But I get it more than most. And I'm not even equipped, because it's not knowledge that really helps you. It's capital. The more capital you have, the more you can leverage depreciating cost of debt, because money loses value over time.
And the more choices you have, right, Zach? Yeah. So, the thing that I've always
the
tried
relationships that it unlocks for you.
Absolutely. I want my children. I want anyone, really. I want it for everybody. I want it for my enemies, really. I want everybody to have more choices, which brings more freedom. If we're living in Africa and we don't even have a monetary system we can trust, there's some amazing entrepreneurs that live on that continent, but boy, they have to claw their way out of hell to even try to get close to where we might get, being fortunate enough to have been born in the United States.
Yeah, I think that it's so true. The people who adopt Bitcoin first are the ones who need it most, and fortunate or unfortunate, depending on your perspective. The United States will probably be one of the later countries to adopt it fully and fully embrace it. because there's just not necessity. And it also undermines the credibility of the dollar if the current reserve currency says, hey, we don't actually have control on this.
I agree with what you've said, and you said it undermines the credibility of the dollar. But if they started putting it on their balance sheet, it would actually support the credibility of the dollar, but it would undermine their control, their power, the whole Cantillon effect, the banking system, the central banks.
I want to push back on that because let's talk, because you saw what happened this week with Terra Luna. Did you see that?
Yeah.
That was exactly their plan. They were like, we're going to create this stable coin that's built on a house of cards, a fiat essentially, and we're going to back it with Bitcoin. And that's going to make it stable and give it value. But what happened was people said, we're going to cause a run and make you sell all your Bitcoin in the open market, and it's not going to be effective. And then they gave up all their Bitcoin. So you could be totally right, but I think
you're making a great point. I think the one difference is Luna's not the world's reserve currency.
Facts. These are big facts.
If Jay Powell says we're going to print $1 trillion and double the market cap of Bitcoin overnight, their investment's probably going to go 10x. It's kind of what it's a version of what Tesla did when they put it on their balance sheet. So I totally agree with you. I thought what Luna was doing was an interesting experiment, and I'm really glad that they did it because it proved a bunch of things that we probably weren't planning on talking about today. And I'm really glad that we now have another experiment in our basic experience, right, for Bitcoin, because it's all good for Bitcoin. And I like that they tried, and I also love that he basically unloaded all of his Bitcoin, and it did not. I don't think it tanked the market at all comparatively.
Exactly.
And so that proved how liquid you can unload whatever it was, billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin.
I think it was $3 billion worth of Bitcoin.
Right.
Find me an asset market where I can spot sell $3 billion without making the price crash.
And when the whole world knows you're going to have to sell it.
Yeah. It's been, I think like the stable coins in general, they're, I do think that they will happen. Like I think they have to. I'm with Michael Saylor.
I'm with Michael Saylor in this one. I think we need at least one stable coin to go along with Bitcoin, if not a number of them. Tether obviously is the most obvious one. Yes, they have counterparty risk, but they don't bounce up and down like Bitcoin does. And there's just all kinds of people, not only my peers, who are their own basket case for a different set of reasons. And then there's people in, the developing world, they just can't, for some of them, it's no big deal. What volatility, because they have the Argentinian peso.
Right, they're used to it.
That's not a problem for them. But in most countries, they're going to say, no, I just cannot take the risk that it's going to go down to half in a week.
Well, if there are, let's say like there's a run on the US dollar, which I don't know, we'll see if that happens. But if there is hyperinflation and the fiat currencies essentially lose confidence, then there wouldn't people just have Bitcoins. There's no volatility in the price, right? Because they have the same quantity of Bitcoin. So I think that my base case is that we're going to have this transitionary period. Maybe it's 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Might be the rest of my life. I may never see the Bitcoin standard in my life, but I do think of the long run, and that's why I don't stop asking why. Like you get to the first principles, and I think in the long run, if Bitcoin is the medium of exchange, then it becomes the unit of account, and the volatility is there is no volatility anymore. The only volatility is the increase in purchasing power that you have through the deflationary forces over time.
Increase and loss. Because you can lose purchasing power day to day. And so I'm in agreement with you, Zach. And in fact, the way I look at it is the price of Bitcoin is relevant only as a barometer for how many people actually understand it.
It's an adoption barometer.
I've written an article that says nobody understands Bitcoin.
No,
and
that's
okay, right. But until more people understand not just Bitcoin, they need to understand money. They need to understand the banking system. They need to understand the financial system, and they need to understand how bad they are. I think I said to you earlier, it's 200 times worse than anyone realizes. They actually need to understand that. Then there's no convincing people that they need to have some Bitcoin. And then understanding Bitcoin is like this, it's magic, right? I mean,
Right.
I'm not a math expert, and there's parts of it that I just go, okay, maybe I could spend brain power for the next 1,000 hours trying to understand how this works, but I'm just going to call that magic, that other people who are smarter than me know how to do the math, etc.
It is, math is it's the language of nature. It's the language of physics, language of the universe. You look at the Fibonacci sequences and the way that snail shells grow in that pie shaped or pie golden ratio. I mean, and Bitcoin is math, and that's why I have so much confidence in it, because it's the one thing that humans can't change, because we didn't invent math in the first place. We discovered it.
Right.
So the idea that there can be this currency that's separate from the government, from humans in a way, like from the intervention.
Well, you're
of the
separating money from state, right?
It's as strange as separation of church and state was 300 and something years ago when the United States was being founded. It's
as groundbreaking, if not more so.
Yeah. Yep. What do you think that leads to? Like, do you think that because this is a lot of times like, people will say, well, if the government can't step in and help when things go wrong,
right,
there'll be chaos. And I've thought through this a lot, and there still will be tough times ahead. I mean, Bitcoin, they say Bitcoin fixes everything, but it doesn't. But it does fix a lot of things. But I think in my perspective or prediction, I guess there are more frequent, less severe shocks because the free market has to sort itself out, and it does that quickly, and it doesn't let these huge inefficiencies build up to where there's such a disaster that the Fed has to step in. So I'm curious if you share that view. How do you think separating money from state will impact society?
Well, I agree with a lot of what you've said. I'm not sure if I'm certainly no good at predicting the future. We can certainly speculate. Here's what I would say, and I think we talked about it maybe before we got going. I am really glad I live in a world with Bitcoin, because whatever's coming, whether it's moderate to severe turbulence in our lives, in the economy, Bitcoin is a constant. It won't change. The consensus rules are not going to change no matter how badly the what hits the fan. And if my unit of account is Bitcoin, then I'm in a pretty smooth sea, even though I know everything else around me, including things like the value of my house or whatever, can be going up or down. And so, we talk about low time preference. It's having a long-term view. It's having a more stable view. Like I said, I'm just happy that Bitcoin exists as an option. We're at some point going to have to live with the reckoning from 2008. If 2008 had happened without Bitcoin being where it is, we'd have been in a world of hurt, at least short term.
There would be no
exit. We would have taken our medicine 13 years ago.
Right.
We've built the debt bubble up to larger. That's probably not a good thing. And it's not one country. Right. There's literally 160 currencies racing to the bottom. Yeah, the way I describe it is you've got 160 currencies going backwards, and you got Bitcoin going forward. You don't have a full awareness that that's what's going on. So You mentioned before, Bitcoin is without question a risk-off asset you want to go to when things get turbulent. Right. That's not widely shared yet. But I think it's just, okay, let's see how the events of today, tomorrow, and the next week and month and year play out, knowing that I have an opt-out, I have an exit strategy from fiat whenever I need it.
So you said something there that reminded me of The Big Short, the movie I saw.
Right. Yeah.
And I this was part of, there's so many different touch points that have really helped me understand little pieces of Bitcoin, right? And they all kind of go together and form this generic worldview, generalized worldview that where I synergize them. But one of the things that you mentioned is that when they bought these credit default swaps, they thought they were going to get rich when the housing market crashed. Lo and behold, though, the custodian who was supposed to pay them out on the trade couldn't, or at least they had a lot of issues. So it's like, cool, even though you're at your mark to market value went up, they can't pay you out. So there's this black swan liquidity custody risk that is just
counterparty risk.
Counterparty. Oh, it's not thought of. And Bitcoin is the bearer asset of the 21st century. There is no counterparty risk. That's crazy.
So the interlocking risks in the system, if you understand them, and I don't even claim to understand them completely,
right?
I would never sleep. I would never sleep again. And that's what I think terrified everybody in 2008 and why they did what they did. By the way, I'm not coming to their aid. I suspect if I were in their shoes, I might have done the same thing. I don't know.
Right. I mean, it was the best path forward. I mean, we've been on this ship since they broke the gold
literally,
standard.
There's no counterparty risk in this asset other than cash. I can't make that statement. I guess I could make that statement about gold or silver if I hold it. Right. But then I got a different issue going on. I can't send gold and silver across the world to Japan in 30 minutes, to another person to pay for something, or frankly, to pay for food, air, water, or not air, pay for food, water, roof over my head. Right. I mean, those, I think that's a really, really important insight that very few people understand. And it's described sometimes as inside money and outside money, but it's all about counterparty risk. And what Wall Street's really good at doing is it's like hide the risk. It's like a hot potato.
Yep.
Here, you take it, Zach. Okay, I'll take it, and then I'll sell this to somebody else. They have it. And then you've got this interlocking chain of all these counterparties, and it's a complete meltdown when it finally starts to unwind.
This sounds like a DeFi protocol.
Exactly. Well, the current financial system is the DeFi protocol before there was DeFi.
That's
absolutely
well said. I'm going to put that in the intro clip.
But that's all it is. Yeah.
Oh man. Well, that's that I love that we've ripping on that. But I know you had quoted Jameson Lopp and said that no one understands Bitcoin, so given, and it was a couple things I wanted to ask you and put them all into one question. So given the volatility that we've been talking about, right? Like that we've experienced, given that you're approaching retirement age, many people that are asking these questions are also approaching retirement age. The baby boomer population is the largest population today, I think, aside from millennials, but maybe that's not even true. So what I'm curious is, like, given the volatility, given the risk, given that they don't understand it, given that it's new, what do you say to baby boomers, to really any age group, but particularly those who need to understand it soon? How do you get them on board? How do you get them on the arc?
Yeah. Well, in the early stages, it's kind of like I had gotten religion and I tried to convince people, but I always try to use and present practical use cases. So I have a neighbor. She's probably 10 years older than I am. She still works. She owns some real estate. And rather than try to convince her to buy Bitcoin, I said, I just purchased some Bitcoin to pay for my taxes for the next 3 years. And that made sense to her because she had rental properties and she was aware at some level about purchasing power. But for the most part, my approach with people today isn't to try and convince them to buy Bitcoin. Most of my peers are probably very comfortable, have a pretty good net worth. They're not worried about money. And I will often say to them, you probably don't need Bitcoin. And I mean it at one level, but that almost always kicks in the opposite, which is that makes them more curious. And then it's all the pressure's off in terms of getting it. And it's almost fascinating because they tend to then start asking me a lot of questions. What I'm looking for in terms of how I convince my peers, which is boomers, to buy into it is I got to know whether or not you're experiencing any pain right now. Like if I've got a very dear friend of mine and I haven't figured out the answer to this yet, she's probably living on a Social Security income, and I probably subsidize a little bit of her lifestyle just because there's no other place she can go.
Yeah.
And I would love to, what's
sorry,
that? And I would love to figure out a way to create something that allows her to basically stretch her Social Security income further. And I know there's a way to do it with Bitcoin as long as we start with some Bitcoin on our balance sheet and then use that in the growth of it over time. But to me, even in 2020, I looked at retiring and I'm like, well, I had a Bitcoin strategy for if I retire and start collecting Social Security, guess where I'm going to put every single nickel of that Social Security?
That's right.
Because it just made sense. I mean, if I don't need it immediately to pay my debts that week, month, year, then I couldn't come up with a good reason why I wouldn't do that. Yeah. So with every person, they're like a snowflake, Zach. If you don't understand where their pain points are, if you don't understand what's got them nervous, like I got another friend, very, very doing very well, does not have any confidence in our government at all. So he's interested in Bitcoin just as like an insurance policy, right? The lifeboat we were talking about, or the Ark. And so every single person's different. There is no one size fits all. And it really depends. You said it earlier, you nailed it. Those who are the most at risk, who are the most vulnerable, are going to adopt it soonest because they will see the use case for it.
Yep. We're obviously both in sales, tying things together. So this reminds me of the rainmaking mindset, right? It's like tie the relevant pain points to the person to make an impact.
I mean, if there's no need, right? If there's no need, if someone doesn't perceive they have a need, then I don't care what you're selling. I mean, I haven't seen anyone do this lately, but I would love to go down in the streets of Denver and say, hey, here's an open dime with $100 on it, or you can have 2 candy bars. And I think even today, most people will take the 2 damn candy bars rather than the open dime with $100 of Bitcoin on it.
Especially with the food shortages.
Yeah. Not that a candy bar is exactly health food, but yes,
it'll
absolutely
keep you alive
true.
For a few hours. No, it's true though. I mean, I've I go through this struggle because I want to tell people about Bitcoin all the time, but they focus on the price, or they're not quite ready to really connect all the dots. And so the question I want to ask you is like, how do you, being that like you have experience as a sales coach and business coach, and like I look like I'm almost hesitant sometimes to teach people because it negatively affects my relationships sometimes. And
absolutely does.
And I'm curious, like, given your experience, like if you have any tips for me or any of the Bitcoiners out there, like how can you convey the importance, kind of the uniqueness of the Bitcoin message without alienating people and without, doing material damage to your relationships and making everybody think you're, crazy?
It's a really great question. It's a really hard question because obviously that's true for all of us. And I've struggled with that myself. What I've reached is the conclusion, keep it to yourself mostly. You can still ask a series of questions around someone's level of understanding of the macro environment we're in.
Like, do they have the foundation already set
up? Are they worried about
understand?
Inflation? So I might ask people, hey, look, do you think inflation's an issue? Do you trust your government? I mean, after COVID,
that's a good one.
Do you trust your government? Some people totally trust their government. No, I mean, and it's like I have no clue how anyone could trust their government at this point, but I know the world is a big place. People, their filter, all of us are filters. No one is seeing the world exactly as it is because it's completely a subjective experience.
Yep.
So what I would say with you, your friends, and I got a great story that's happened actually in a Bitcoin meetup, particularly with your friends and your family, the people you care about the most, if they sit there and go, hey, Zach, I don't want to hear another conversation about Bitcoin, you just have to honor that. Okay. I've got a friend like that.
Good advice.
And there's one of the Bitcoiners, she has a sister who's a lawyer in New York, and she kept trying to orange pill her. I'm not, by the way, big on even that phrase, because to me, it's about educating people. And it's educating people on money first, Bitcoin only if you don't get how bad the system is. Like I said earlier, what I try to do is to get people's understanding of how bad the system is and where they're experiencing their own pain from that system. So she kept trying to orange pill her very successful New York lawyer sister and was getting nowhere, and it was starting to piss off her sister. And I'm like, stop. There's no need to keep trying.
Right.
Just
She'll never adopt it if
No, just love your sister. Bitcoin's not an issue. Don't make it a point of separation between you and your sister. That's not helping you or her.
And that's the whole point, right? The whole point is to empower. I lose sight of it myself sometimes. Like
we all do.
It's about, like, the end of the day, like, Bitcoin is a tool just like anything else. And it's a tool for hopefully making life less about money in the first place, and so you can focus more on relationships.
Bingo. Right? So, we haven't touched on it, but you just hit it. To me, the irony of having a absolute scarcity, i.e. the 21 million, is it triggers an abundance mindset, which I think I had before Bitcoin, but it really triggers it when you understand it, because it go back to that, my labor and my life force, I'm going to save it in something, and I want as many options as possible for as long as possible. And so you're absolutely right. Bitcoin's a tool. It's a valuable tool. It's a once in a species invention, or it's a discovery, whatever the hell you want to call it. But it's still, at the end of the day, it's a tool. I can't eat Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't automatically make me have a good relationship with my mother, father, sister, brother, friends. In fact, it could do the reverse, like the story I was just telling you. And so I think we forget that. I mean, at the end of the day, one of the things I was a big fan of, I was a fan of Slow Money, which is all about healthy soil. I don't know if you've read any Alan Farrington's stuff. It's phenomenal. No. And there's Texas Slim is now getting into that. Mike Hobart's written about it. They'd be fantastic guests, by the way, I think, on your podcast, because I tie soil. It's a very foundational capital, right? This is Alan Farrington saying this. And there's nobody in America that actually appreciates soil. There's less understanding of how important soil is to my health than Bitcoin, than the understanding of Bitcoin.
So I listened to Joe Rogan with Sadhguru, and he's a guru. I don't know. But
I haven't heard of him, but I've listened to Joe doing
like an hour.
Yeah.
They literally just talked about the importance of soil. And I was like, he's like, you come from the soil, you return to the soil, you are the soil. And I was like, holy shit, this guy's on another level, man.
And it is. It's so far removed from us because of modern life. And again, it's not necessarily something we need to get into, but you can have you can have Texas Slim as a guest. You can have a Jason Wurich, who's a rancher in Crawford, Colorado. He could be a great guest.
Got some beef from Jason. I got a freezer full of rich ranch beef in right now.
And so do I. That's right.
We went on the same order together.
Somebody picked it up on your behalf. You didn't come that day.
That's right. That's right. Yep. I was a busy man in the phones.
Back to the way relationships. I wrote a book called Relationships Are Everything, and I mean that. And it's business and it's personal. Business is personal to me. And never, 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 I hope anyone listening ever makes Bitcoin something that you use as a reason to create a disconnect between you and anyone you care about. I don't care who it is. Your kids, your wife, your spouse, your brother, your sister, your best friend. It's just not worth it. So drop it. Zip it. Right?
So dropping the knowledge bombs.
Let's put it, it's a hierarchy, right, Zach? Would you rather have $1 billion of Bitcoin and no family that you want to hang out with and friends?
The last thing, we talked a bit before we started recording. I don't use Twitter anymore, but the last thing I retweeted was from Eric Yakes, who was a guest on the show.
Yep.
And he says, awesome. You can't, I'm paraphrasing it. It was, You can't buy family that loves you and friends that care about you. Monetary wealth is meaningless without these things. Yeah. And I was like, 100%. This is the perfect tweet to ride off into the sunset on, because it's, at the time, like I think I personally was starting to lose sight of that. This was in November, right? We're at almost 70,000. I'm sitting there counting the dollars and which vacations I'm going to go on. You could hear it in the podcasts that we recorded in October, November. Like, that's why we record through bull and bear markets, because we're trying to give our listeners the trend. Like, this is what a Bitcoiner journey is like. It's, although it's been years, I'm still on it and I still make mistakes, and I'm still a human being. Right. And this whole invention of Bitcoin, I think, is part of like how we remember that, because our whole capitalist society through fiat money over the last 50 years, which is, basically your whole life and certainly my whole life, we've gotten more focused on money and less focused on the things that bring us joy. And I hope that Bitcoin's that foundation that brings us back to that.
Bitcoin allows for human flourishing. And, you use the phrase bear market and bull market. And I've now started inside Bitcoin Magazine, starting to tease people that is an investment mindset slipping into your language. And I know you don't think of it as an investment. And so a bull market and a bear market is irrelevant. Is it still a good savings tool? The day I got in, it was a good savings tool. When it went up to 69, it was a good savings tool. When it went down to 25, it was a good savings tool. Nothing changed in my thesis that it's a good savings tool. Back to your point and your question about the battery, I just want to make sure that when I get ready to go and spend from that hard-earned work that I did, that I have enough purchasing power to have the freedom to spend time with people I love, right? It's your last tweet. And it's real easy for all of us to forget it. I am absolutely as guilty of, the same things you're talking about. We all lose perspective on that. But Bitcoin is, the point of Bitcoin is so that you can spend more time and freedom and have flourishing with the people you care about, not so you can sit there and count, how many Satoshis you have.
Right. Because they're just digital units. They do nothing without converting them into it's a new energy, right? And
they're a new idea on how to preserve my life force and my life energy and purchasing power. It's a new idea. No, you don't have to use it. It's 100% opt-in. Although I think what's going to happen is people will eventually be using Bitcoin and Lightning and they won't even know it. Right. I think that's when we know we really survive. We really made our strides. But in the meantime, I just, I'm happy to go along, and I want to be able. I love having the freedom, and it sounds like you resonate with this. I love having the freedom to make choices, not because I have to make a living.
Yeah.
But because like you're doing this is a passion project for you. I really respect that.
So hit that subscribe button. If you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button.
But I think it's a beautiful thing, because there's a lot of things you could do with your discretionary energy, but you're doing this and you're educating people, right, on this new monetary asset that, to me, again, I love Brandon Quittam's thing. It's a pioneer species. It's allowing the human species, back to your question about, nobody understands Bitcoin, and that's okay. I don't understand Bitcoin. I don't claim to understand it. Yeah, I've got study in it, so I'm further along than I was the day I went in. But I think the whole species, human species, is going to take decades fully to learn how amazing a property it was. Hat tip to people like Robert Breedlove who've talked about this, and Gigi. It's got its own unit for measuring time. Again, thank you, Gigi. There's Marty Bent as well. There's a bunch of things about this that I'm actually thinking of writing an article. Have you ever heard the proverb of the 6 blind men and the elephant?
And the elephant? No, I haven't.
Yeah. So the concept is you got 6 blind men all touching the elephant, and someone thinks it's the tail's the rope, or the trunk is a tree, or the body of the elephant is a wall, or whatever. And so we're all touching the same thing,
thinking it's different,
but we're describing it differently. So mine's going to be 330 million people in Bitcoin, right? The blind 330 million people in Bitcoin, right? Because we don't understand it fully. Yeah, you may understand it better than I do, and that's great. And then hopefully you can teach me, or I can teach you, or teach my peers if they don't understand something important. But again, I go back to too much focus on Bitcoin. Here's the one disappointment I have, I think, with the whole Bitcoin community. And because I've been a teacher and an educator, I can see it. We're 13 years into Bitcoin, and I can't, you name the place I can go to learn about money, the banking system, and the financial system in a day and really understand the nature of the problem, and never discusses Bitcoin. Where can I go?
Yeah, I mean, maybe you read
they don't
like
exist.
F.A. Hayek or...
But F.A. Hayek doesn't teach a course. So, right. I mean, the Looking Glass. So Greg Foss, Jason Sansoni, there's a couple of other folks, Seb Bunny. They're trying to do stuff like this to close the gap, because the message I keep trying to get across to people is, if you don't understand really our monetary system, our banking system, and our financial system, you're probably never going to understand Bitcoin as a savings tool.
Totally.
You may see it as an investment, and that's fine. That's not wrong. But it's like only halfway. And even understanding as a savings tool is probably 3/4 of the way. What's 100%? Beats the hell out of me, Zach. Let's check back with each other in a decade or two, and maybe we'll have a better understanding of what it all meant.
Well, that's what I really like about Eric Yakes' book, The Seventh Property, is that he leads not with Bitcoin. And actually, it really doesn't even mention Bitcoin in the first half of the book. It's all about the history of fiat, and only then, once he's set the stage of understanding how the current system works, does he then compare it to Bitcoin to it. And that's exactly why I really like the fiat standard from Saifedean's book too, because he does exactly that in reverse. So it's sort of, okay, now that you understand fiat, here's how it looks relative to Bitcoin. But I completely, totally agree. Like, if you don't understand the problem, you're not going to see Bitcoin as the solution. It's just like,
right.
There's no problem to solve, right? It touches on the thing like about sales and pain points. Like, if you don't have something to tie it to that you personally viscerally understand, then you're going to have a hard time seeing the long term. Maybe you see it as an investment, but like, you're not going to see the monetary aspect.
I totally agree with you. I love what Eric has written. I think it's fantastic. And in fact, I learned on your show, and I may have heard this before, but he said that he wrote it for basically the financial types because he's a private equity guy. And it's like what Saifedean wrote in the Bitcoin standard. They were more interested, and he framed it that way. But then the great story, and I think I told you this before we got the show going, in Slack today in Bitcoin Magazine, one of my coworkers was saying, wow, we're making progress because there's some little kid that said she was wearing, my coworker was wearing apparently a Bitcoin shirt like this one, right? You've got one on. And the little kid said, do you invest in Bitcoin? And she's like, right. Yes. And to your point, that's only halfway up the mountain. What I would suggest is all of us Bitcoiners need to say, well, no, I don't invest in Bitcoin. I save in Bitcoin.
Yep.
So that it creates a level of curiosity. What I found both as a coach, not just for any group of people, but a group of people, lawyers, very successful. If I told them what to do, it went in this year and exited that year as fast as they heard it. Which is what we're doing when we orange pill most people, versus you actually help make people curious
by asking questions.
If they're curious and they have a problem, then they're interested in what we have to say about Bitcoin.
Yep.
And not a moment before.
I went out with some friends a few weeks ago, and one of them made a kind of smug remark about how expensive the drinks were at the bar. And I was like, well, that's why you should quit drinking, first off. But then I was like, this is he sees the pain, opportunity, teach about Bitcoin. And he was wide eyed, like, what? And I think it'll take a couple more touch points, but you could see the gears turning,
wheels turning.
And
you just reminded me. You asked me earlier. How do I sort of explain and talk about Bitcoin with my friends? And literally, what I have said to them before is, well, what I like about Bitcoin is everything's getting cheaper.
Right.
Because in an era of inflation,
they're like, wait, what? That's not fair.
What? Right? It's like, what? No, it's not getting cheaper. Okay, well, yes, it is if it's Bitcoin and you look at it through a long enough arc, right? No, it's not getting cheaper in purchasing power from November to today. But still, I will say that, and then I will drop it. And if they're curious, they'll come back with questions. And if they're not, they don't care.
Yeah.
No sense trying to convince somebody of something they don't want. Right.
And that's the thing.
That's
about
a bad
Bitcoin.
salesperson.
Like, you need Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't need you. Like the system exists when there was one person who had Bitcoin, and it's not much different today. The blockchain still works the same way when Satoshi created it. So it's really the people that benefit from it because it's a tool. It's like, but it doesn't. There's no one and I'll use like altcoins as a comparison here. Like altcoins need you to adopt it because they need the liquidity in order to keep their projects sustained.
Keep going.
Bitcoin sustains itself, and I think that is what has allowed it to be here, still today.
And the ultimate altcoin is every currency in the world. We were talking about all that interlocking risk, right? I mean, those altcoins didn't get created out of thin air, and they certainly didn't use Bitcoin as the model. They used our current financial system as the model and said, okay, how can I make money? Well, they're not trying to make money that lasts 100 years. They're trying to make money that allows them to buy their house, their car, their whatever they perceive as the symbol of success. I think one of the things about both COVID, more so even than 2008, I don't think 2008 people saw that as a values reset that it really was, or at least it wasn't as widely understood that way. This is my perception, right? COVID definitely was a values reset in the sense of, okay, do I really want to commute an hour each way? Okay, do I really trust the school system's doing right by my children who they're teaching? Okay, is my college education really worth what it says? Okay, is the food supply really, really something I can trust, or do I need to actually take some responsibility for my own healthcare choices? And as I say to people, where you live is a healthcare decision. So if I'm not close to a Jason Wirich farms or ranch where I can buy really high quality food, that's a decision. And then what I eat every day is a healthcare decision. Well, those things, I had arrived at those conclusions before I got into Bitcoin. So I can't credit Bitcoin for that. But 2020 really started to say, okay, well, my health is pretty darn important. And am I doing everything I can, or is that the government's responsibility? I'm sad to say, I think there's an awful lot of people that think it's the government's responsibility to keep them healthy and safe. And that is so delusional.
Well, we've been talking about this, like all of the pros of Bitcoin, right? But I know you've wrote this article about the 3 blind spots in Bitcoin, and I want to reference
I haven't written yet. I'm writing it.
Okay, well, there's a preview to come.
If you're listening, exactly.
But I want to use the image of the 6 blind men and the elephant, and imagine that they are looking for the blind spots in Bitcoin. So what do you think the threats are, and what people are missing?
Well, I think you sort of tacitly acknowledged it when you said you haven't posted on Twitter. I think Twitter's a great tool, but I think it's a blind spot because I think it's an incredible echo chamber. And right now, if the market's down, that can be a really pull you down with it kind of a thing. And if I went into my neighborhood and asked 100,000 people about Bitcoin, I guarantee you almost nobody's even going to know about Twitter, and they're not going to know about Telegram, which I am on a fair bit. I'm not on Twitter, but I'm on Telegram, and they're not going to know much about it. And so we got all this echo chamber of a very, very, very tiny, tiny percentage of people who admittedly understand it better than everyone else.
Right.
They're all talking to each other. And then the worst part is there's a level of arrogance that I don't think they even see that floats on Twitter. And so to me, I just want to pop their bubble and go, guys, no. The name of the game is less time on Twitter, more time trying to understand what your neighbor, your friend, your family thinks of as their problems in their life. And it might have nothing to do with Bitcoin. And then only when it's a monetarily or banking or financial related issue do you even get close to bringing up the idea of Bitcoin. So that's one. Okay. If you want to react, go ahead. I know you probably likely to agree with me.
I think that's, again, it's like part of what I'm learning myself. Like I being like someone who was in finance, I've been a financial planner. Now I'm a Bitcoin advisor. Like this is like constantly in my subconscious, and it's in the top of my mind most of the times. Like Bitcoin saving, planning, and I'll be the first to admit that I know that those aren't the healthiest ways to live. But I guess it's fitting because I am aware of it. And I also, and that's why I got off Twitter, because I'm like, I need, especially now that I work in the Bitcoin industry for a Bitcoin company and I talk about Bitcoin all day long. And I also do a Bitcoin podcast and I also go to the Bitcoin meetups. Like I need some type of, it's like, I need the yang to remember that there's the yin, I need this balance to remind myself of why I'm doing this in the first place.
I think I could, if I take it away from Twitter, just call it, we have all, I'll include myself, have a device addiction. Now, some of us are addicted to likes on Facebook or likes on Twitter or shares on Twitter. None of it's wrong, but to me, that's mistake number one. I'll call it a device addiction, but it's closely related to number two. And I would say, and the strength of the Bitcoin community is they're an incredibly generous group of people, but they don't maximize the use of what I would call their peer-to-peer network. I used to just call it network, but since you're in Bitcoin, you'll understand what I mean by peer-to-peer, but it's the face-to-face stuff. It's what you and I are doing, or when we meet at a Bitcoin, Denver Bitcoin meetup or whatever. So the way I used to describe it as a coach, I got my first email address probably in 1992, and I was coaching before that. And I used to say and I'd learned from some of the best rainmakers that they were unbelievably good at building their network. And their mindset was putting people together for their mutual benefit, not so I got something. They were just incredibly generous, and they were great connectors. So then email comes in. This is long before social media. And what do you think happened to the peer-to-peer part of networking for most people once email kicked in?
Went away.
Get better or worse?
I think it probably got worse.
It got way worse. Yep. So now, this is before social media. This unbelievable tool, peer-to-peer, is neglected. Then email kicks in. Then we get social media. Do you think it's gotten better?
Right. The irony is thick, the more tools we have, the worse, the less real the communication gets in a way.
And I think there's this hunger for connection of the kind that, yes, we're doing a little bit but we're still on a screen. There's still that personal, there's that face-to-face.
Yeah. The nonverbal.
The blind spot existed long before Bitcoin. So it's not really just Bitcoiners. So that's kind of giving him an out, but I feel it strongly. That's why I wrote a book called Relationships Are Everything, because they're really, really important. Like if there weren't enough food around, if there weren't enough all kinds of resources, your local network of friends, neighbors, and family are your survival. And if you go to any other country, they already get this because they're in that survival mode. Yeah. But we, because of our wealth, our affluence, thank you, Alex Gladstein, check our financial privilege. We just don't see it. And so that to me would be sort of number two. And then I've been talking about the other one around it almost all the time, and that's sort of education. I'm really disappointed that the Bitcoin community hasn't created at least one go-to place where I can learn about money, the banking system, and the financial system, and all the reasons why it's not exactly serving us, and not even talk about Bitcoin. Because once you understand how bad the current system is, you recognize it's literally a house of cards. Yes, it might go another decade. I don't think it'll go that long, but whatever. But in the meantime, I can exit it today. I don't have to wait for it to topple.
Yeah, and there's liquidity too.
That education piece to me is a big miss. And the thing that I'm excited about, so in fairness, Bitcoin Magazine, I think it's and Nick Ward and I and CK and a bunch of other folks are working to really build out that piece, because I think there's a need to recognize, to me, orange pill's the wrong word. Educate's the better word. My goal, and it's not even orange pill, because orange pill is all about Bitcoin. Educate, in my view, so I'm speaking at the Pizza Day on Sunday, and the name of the topic is what you don't know about money and the banking system will hurt you. And orange pilling is about Bitcoin. What I'm talking about with education is everything but Bitcoin, because I want people to understand how the system works now so that they go, well, this sucks. What's my exit strategy? Oh, well, I can explain to you a little bit about what I think Bitcoin does, but you make your own decision. And I think giving people the power of choice around how they spend their money, that's why I'm not a big fan of crapping on shitcoins. It's like, look, if people want to be separated from their money by investing in that stuff, more power to you.
That's right.
I'm not smart enough to know whether or not some of those are going to work or not. Yes, most of them are scams, in my opinion. I can express that opinion if people ask me. And there's only one Bitcoin. But I don't want to take away someone's power of choice. How do I know that the very thing, losing their shirt in some shitcoin, was not, in fact, the most valuable thing to happen in their life? How do I know that?
Yeah.
There's no way I can know that.
I think it goes back to the awareness of relationships,
Yep.
Can you tell us about, just because we're going to wrap up soon, the Monetary Declaration of Independence and how you got started with this through Bitcoin Magazine?
Yeah, well, actually, it was interesting. It started as a document, and again, I'm a boomer, so it was a Word document. And I got really pissed off when somebody would accuse Bitcoin of being a Ponzi scheme when the dollar's the Ponzi scheme, right? So almost every single thing about that the mainstream narrative says about Bitcoin is actually true of the dollar or the financial system or the banking system. So I wrote this document, sat on my computer, probably from the day I started to research it in November 2020. By the summer of last year, I looked up to see if anyone had actually written a Declaration of Monetary Independence. There was like one person, and I forget who it was, my apologies. And it wasn't quite what I had envisioned, which obviously now exists as a website as well as a document. But I wrote a first draft.
Website?
Well, the website for mine, it's actually called Declaration of Monetary Independence.org. You can go there and read it. It's got 27 things that are described that are wrong with fiat. And then there's another 29 things that describe what Bitcoin is all about that really starts to be a better alternative. And all it's saying is, look, give us a choice, separate money from state. Bitcoin's already done it. So we didn't really need a Declaration of Monetary Independence. But what I felt was valuable was to create something, get some original signers, put it on a website, and then my inspiration was actually the Great Barrington Declaration, if you know what that is.
I don't.
Okay, well, go to the Great Barrington Declaration. It's epidemiologists back in October of 2020 saying, look, folks, focused protection is the way to go with COVID. And it was signed by all these doctors, these epidemiologists, and then just ordinary people. And I'm not worried about the raw numbers, but I think there's a lot of people, I know for a fact, because we created a 9 by 12 foot version of this at the Miami conference in April. And we had something like 2,000 people sign it. It was amazing. And
Wow.
What was interesting, Zach, is they didn't just sign it and kind of quietly walk off. I would sit there and hand them a Sharpie and go, here, you want to sign it? Really? And so then they'd go and they'd sign it. And then after they'd sign it, they'd come back to me and they'd say, thank you. Now, some of them knew I had written it, but a lot of them didn't. But it was like, well, thank you for signing it. But the level of energy around the fact that they interacted and put their John Hancock somewhere was even beyond what I would have envisioned when we created this 9 foot by 12 foot, basically real live edition of this declaration. So,
again, it goes back to it's about the impact, right? Like Bitcoin is just
yes.
a tool,
and the experience.
I feel like that's been the whole theme today is like, don't lose sight of the fact that this tool is to make life on Earth better for human beings, to increase the time that you can spend focusing on relationships and family and personal growth and patience, like all of the things that you deep down know are more important, but you're so caught up in running the fiat hamster wheel, you forget about them and don't even take time to stop and smell the roses, you know?
I totally agree. I actually call that Fiat disease. We all have Fiat disease, myself included. I'm not excluding myself.
Working my way towards curing it.
Well, but no, and you don't, maybe it's like just like the alcoholic. You're always constantly kind of working at it. That's the awareness you said earlier. You nailed it. It's just being aware of where that kind of thinking, it's basically scarcity thinking. And you have to become aware of it before you can choose to let it go.
Yep.
And so if you're not aware of it and how much it's controlling your life, you're never going to let it go.
There's no reason to. It's like
There's no point, right?
You're not looking for a solution until you identify the problem.
Exactly.
So the author of the Monetary Declaration of Independence also is working on a children's book. Is that what you were telling me?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's more. So this is a call for people that think they have a children's book around money or the banking system or the financial system or Bitcoin. And illustrators. There already are some really good books out there. There's one that's called Bitcoin for Kiddos. I forget the one that was done by the rabbi.
Hello Bitcoin. I think that was one.
There's Hello Bitcoin. Yep. There's several. And my theory is, so I own a publishing company because I've written 2 books myself that are business books. And I've also published under that label 2 children's books. One which is actually called A Tale of Two Carrots, which is about conventional grown carrot and a restoratively grown carrot. But what I realized about children's books is the ability, we need to start at 4 years old, educating every single person on the planet about money being that battery that we started the conversation with. And then understanding that Bitcoin might be a really nice way of preserving that, so that what it does, and the beauty of a children's book is the adult has to read it to them. So it's the ultimate Trojan horse.
Isn't that the truth?
If I had the ability, and I'm going to do this with Bitcoin Magazine, I know Nick Ward has mentioned it in a meeting that we had with some other folks at the Looking Glass. I would like to find both authors and illustrators, and we create a series of these children's books that end up in every library of every elementary through college level, but they're children's books that people can actually start learning about the system. And the inspiration really was Einstein, who said, look, if you can't explain it clearly, you don't understand it well enough.
Yep.
And it's actually hard to write some of these things. So I'm not saying I'll have one out like at the end of this year, but the goal, the big reach, the big idea is you start educating 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds. Like, I'm sure you've probably seen the ones with Lily, who's 4 years old, and she does those videos. She's adorable, right?
Yep.
But I mean, having children's books for that age appropriate that start to teach about either money or whatever, it'll be very simple concepts, and they might even be metaphors. I think having a series of those kinds of books will do more to close that education gap we've been talking about this whole show than almost having a formal course where you send adults to learn about money, the banking system, and the financial system.
Right, because then they learn these principles, and then they are reinforced through living. They see them, and then as they grow, they see these things, and it's like, oh wait, that's what really puts it in their subconscious, where it becomes a worldview and a way that they live their life, rather than just an idea that they came across once.
Right, and Bitcoin is, as we both, I think, would agree on, is an idea, and you can't kill it. But at the same time, I want to water it. I want to put seeds in the mind of a 4, 5, or 6-year-old, and I want to water it, and I want to make sure, I want to nurture it, and I want to make sure that by the time they're old enough to actually have a job and save money, that they go, oh, well, I can save it in dollars or Bitcoin. And if I can get those kinds of decisions starting happening getting those happening at 12 or 13 or 15 or 16 or whenever, it's just a mindset. It's not, hyper Bitcoinization, I think you and I can be hyper Bitcoinized personally, right? If we decide to make it our unit of account, but I'd still like to see it invisible, right? So that everyone's using it. But I also want every single person on the planet to know, hey, this is an option. The current monetary system where the government was in charge, that was the basic point of the declaration. It's like, look, money isn't the exclusive purview of our government.
Right.
And as Satoshi put, I think either in his white paper or in an email, they've always abused that trust. So let's try one that's got a consensus algorithm, use math, use SHA-256, something that you can actually trust will probably still be working for you in 100 years or in 30 years, rather than this state-created thing. We happen to live in a country where we have the most stable of currencies, but all that is, it's the dirtiest, it's the cleanest, dirtiest shirt in the pack. No. And I use this metaphor. Every other currency is running the race backwards. Bitcoin's the only one in my mind that's going forward.
Should be a easy, predictable outcome over the long term. That's the case, right? With a long enough time horizon. And we've seen monetary resets. I mean, it's not like this isn't like the first time there's ever been a global currency reserve change. I mean, the pound was the reserve currency until, I believe, World War II. So this is like, we're just kind of like, our turn's over. Hopefully,
but I think
my goal is that uniquely this time, there may not be another country that takes over the world reserve currency, but it may be the last one where money is now no longer the domain of any government. And there will still be countries, there will still be governments, and there'll still be cultures. Gosh, I hope there's still cultures. Of what makes life rich.
Of course.
But the government fiddling around with the money supply and the after effects and ripple effects that has on those countries themselves, I think those are going to be more, I'll use detethered, to use the tether. And I think that, decoupled and from there, you're going to see, I think, a new era of human flourishment. Now, it's going to take a while. I'm turning 30. I think it'll happen in my lifetime. I think it'll, if I have kids someday, I'm sure it'll happen in their lifetime.
Yeah.
For people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, I think, that's why I would take care of myself. That's why I would eat healthy. That's why I would be, because I mean, ultimately, like we've been talking about, and we'll kind of wrap up and do an outro here after this, but like we're talking about Bitcoin as time and energy, right? And, you really can't control when you go, you have a finite amount. Unfortunately, you have an also unknown finite amount. So why not, people freak out about securing their Bitcoin, but don't give two thoughts about, chugging a bottle of vodka sometimes or
eating like crap.
Eating McDonald's. It's these things are also taking away your time and energy. So I hope that some people will listen to our conversation and get inspiration from that Bitcoin's a tool, and what the price of it does is out of your control. But what you do how you take care of yourself, the relationships that you focus on. These are all things that are within your control.
100%.
That's what we should focus on.
Yeah, 100%. And the thing you mentioned reset, and the thing that makes me most optimistic and positive is, for the first time, you've sort of articulated it, we have a reset where Bitcoin is an option. So we don't care if a group of very powerful countries with the strongest currencies get together and try and redraw the map on what money looks like. And in fact, maybe the meeting in El Salvador with the 44 countries that have absolutely no power, like they did at Bretton Woods, all convening around Bitcoin, is one of the most optimistic things that any of us can look forward to. And I think, frankly, if I'm in your sort of peer group, and I've said this to my kids, I'm way more encouraged and optimistic about the future because there's an option like Bitcoin. And I guess stay tuned. We'll see how it plays out.
Well said, Mark. And it's I think Bitcoin is one of the most important things that I cling to for hope for the future.
Technologies. Yep.
And it's not hope that I get rich. It's not hope that it succeeds so I can walk around and say, see, I told you guys I was right. It's because I want everyone in the world to get stronger together, like the relationships that, and I've seen money separate people, and I've seen the struggles that it leads to relationships and to families and to just your self-esteem, and we've got so many people on antidepressants and all these days, and I'm just maybe I'm a little naive in that echo chamber on Twitter that we're talking about, but I do think that Bitcoin may not fix all those things, right? But it can give you a foundation to work from, right? If you build a solid foundation, you can take your time and build the actual house correctly.
Absolutely.
So, any parting words of wisdom for our listeners?
No, actually, thank you. It's been a fun conversation. I really have enjoyed it, and I keep up the good work. So, anyone that's in Bitcoin, here's what I say. Thank you for all you do for Bitcoin.
That's awfully kind of you, Mark. Well, where can our listeners, like, if they want to find your writing, learn about your...
Well, if they want to find my articles, you can just go on to Bitcoin Magazine. And I think if you look up my name, you can probably find it, which is kind of hard to spell. But An Open Letter to My Children, I think, was the first one. Or, nobody understands Bitcoin, but that's okay. Just look up one of them. You'll get all of them. I think I've written 9 or 10. If they want to get a hold of me, in fact, I haven't already done this. I'm always looking for people that want to write for Bitcoin Magazine and they have a message. So they can actually get a hold of me. I'll actually give my email. That's one of my other frustrations. Every podcast I think I ever listened to in my life, it's, you can find me on Twitter, right? And you're not going to find me on Twitter. I mean, I have a Twitter account, but you're not going to get a hold of me that way. But it's mark@btcmedia.org. And they can certainly reach out to me. Love to hear if you've got an article in mind or a children's book or you're an illustrator, whatever. Anything you want to contribute. The cool part of Bitcoin is we're all playing for the same team and we have an alignment of incentives. I've never seen that in my lifetime with anything else. And it's a fascinating thing. So if there's anyone out there that, thinks they might want to write, or they've already written a bunch of cool articles, by all means, reach out to me, and I'd love to at least start a dialogue. But
awesome, yeah, we're stronger together.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
I love that. I love that saying. I think I heard that like last week from someone. So
well, the other one that actually there's another one I heard that was even more appropriate because we're in this financial storm, and you've heard the saying, "We're all in the same boat." No, we're not. We're all in the same storm. We're not all in the same boat. And I think it's useful to remember that when folks are trying to quote orange pill or convince someone. Again, it goes back to everything you said. It's the relationships that we build, and it's about flourishing. And Bitcoin's a tool to help us do that. And that's a pretty exciting thing to consider. All things considered.
Well, you seem to be flourishing right now, Mark. I can just see the positivity.
I'm having fun.
That's it.
I get to work with young I get to work with young, really inspired people like you. Honestly, it's really true. I mean, and I mean, Dylan LeClaire's on our team. He's like 20 or 21.
Dylan
No, he just turned
Eclair.
21.
Tell
So,
him
I mean,
he's
it's
Dylan
really
Eclair.
amazing. Some of these folks, it's really been fun. And, you know, I was fortunate enough in my life and in my career. I used to say I haven't worked a day in my life. And I mean, I really, really love what I did, even in my quote fiat job. But I that also got old, and this is kind of renewal, and it's been a lot of fun. So I am having some fun. I hope all the folks that are listening can find a way to make their life flourish even more. Obviously, Bitcoin is one of those tools to help them get there.
Well, this was also a lot of fun. So
good.
Thank you so much for coming on Value Stack Podcast, Mark. I really appreciate your time and carving this out in the middle of the day. So we'll post this in a couple days, and I'm excited to hear how the pizza turns out. I'm sad I'm going to miss it this Sunday, but
yeah, pizza day.
I'll be looking in Telegram. So thanks again for coming on, and to our listeners, we'll see you next time.